This is where we previously left off, and now we move forward to the third major rapid change. Let's move on to the next slide, see some pictures, and then we will discuss what's the whole content about. Third major rapid change. So the first thing that comes and that should come to your mind after seeing this pic is the color change. Yes, this slide is about the color change following death. The most visible of all three pictures is this lower left one, as the color is quite visibly changed. So what's this phenomena called? This is called lividity. This is called lividity or hypostasis. Lividity, postmortem lividity or hypostasis. So what's the mechanism? The mechanism is the passive settling of RBCs under the influence of gravity. So when the circulation says there is absence of circulation following the death of the body, so there is complete loss of tone of blood vessels. The RBCs can move in any direction, so they tend to follow the gravity and move in that direction. In this picture you can see that the lividity is most visible in the lower extremities. Why is that, and what does it signify? It shows that the skin discoloration is in the legs and hands because of their dependent position in relation to the vertical body after death. Vertical body after death means that the cause of death was most probably hanging. And in this lower left one, postmortem hypostasis in a posterior distribution, the body has been rolled to the right side. Areas of pallor can be seen as a result of pressure of the body on a firm surface, whereas parts of the body that had not been in direct contact with the surface are purple or pinkish because of the settling of blood under gravity. This body had been lying on its back since death, and then it was moved. So that's I think that's enough from that slide, and we should move forward. Lever mortis. Another name for this process is lever mortis, aka lividity or hypostasis. It is a mechanical phenomena characterized by discoloration of skin. So it is a discoloration of skin and staining of dependent parts of the body due to accumulation of blood in toneless blood vessels due to gravity. It is a mechanical event, not a chemical one like rigor mortis, or an emotional one like instantaneous mortis. It is a mechanical event and it occurs due to gravity. Progression. So how does it progress? It starts at about 30 minutes post-mortem and is most obvious by 12 hours. And does it fade away? No, it does not fade away like rigor mortis, which is followed by secondary flaccidity. And are you noticing something here? Absence boje. Well, that's a mnemonic. Boje is a term we use in Pashto for a sack. So it is absent in 5 conditions. In each letter of boje is a name of different condition. So lividity can be absent in deaths related to blood loss. B is for blood loss. O is for olds, as olds are mostly have mostly died of prolonged or chronic diseases, and chronic diseases we know uh, cause anemia of chronic disease or ACD. So since there is anemia, the blood count is already low, so the RBC count is already low, so the passive settling will not be that obvious if it occurs in the dead body. J is for jaundiced patients. So a person dies and has jaundice, or even if a person has very dark skin tone, so the hypostasis will not be very obvious, or in some cases even absent. Actually, it will not be absent, but it will be masked. Rather, I should say, it will be masked by the dark tone of the skin due to jaundice or the normal skin color, which is dark. A is for anemic deaths, just like the case in death of the old people. So if there is anemia related deaths, the blood count will be low, and if the blood count is low, this mechanical event will not occur quite obviously. And Y is for young, very young patients. Their blood count is also not very good, so it is absent in them also. So let's go through this slide once more, and inshallah things will get a little easier. Lever mortis, aka lividity or hypostasis, is a mechanical event characterized by discoloration of skin and staining of dependent parts of the body, and it is due to the accumulation of blood in toneless blood vessels due to gravity. So what are dependent parts of the body? The dependent part of the body are those that are lower than the others, at a uh, at a position lower than the others, so the gravitational pull will follow or will push the blood towards those parts. And inshallah it will get clear when we move on to next slides, where we will discuss the significance of a post-mortem lividity. Progression, starts at about 30 minutes post-mortem, and it's most obvious by 12 hours. Absence in Boje. B is for blood loss related tests. O is for very old people who have mostly died of chronic diseases, which results in anemia of chronic disease. So if there is anemia, the settling of blood will not be very much obvious. And J is jaundice or even very dark toned people. If they die, the lividity will be masked by their skin tone. It will be present, but it will be masked by their skin tone. A is for anemia related death. And if there is anemia, just like in the death of old people, anemia, the blood count will be low. And if the blood count is low, the lividity will not be that much marked. And Y is for very young people. Forensic interest. Forensic interest. So what's the forensic interest? Can you guess anything? Well, what do these pictures tell us about? The first picture told us when the body died, it was in vertical position, so its dependent parts were lower extremities and the blood accumulated in lower extremities. And this second picture shows us that when the body died, its dependent parts were its posterior surface. So it died in a supine position most probably. And what does this third picture tell us about? It tells us that when the body died, the post-mortem hypostasis in the third picture on the front of the body, it shows that the person down face down, most probably on bed. So if the person died face down, then the uh, area of considerable pallor will be present on the on the face, because on the areas of contact, the blood vessels, the areas of contact are high pressure areas, and blood tends not to settle down there. The linear marks formed by the pressure from creases in the blanket, these linear marks you see, these are found by the creases of his blanket. So what was all this discussion about? It was about the forensic interest. So the thing it tells us about is the position of the body when it died. The pattern of lividity confirms, or I should say suggests, the position of the body following position of the body prior to death or during the death. So let's move on to next slide and see what's there. Distribution of hypostasis helps determining position of the body. Hypostasis is absent on the areas of contact. Like in the previous slides, the picture of the cadaver that died face down, his face was relatively paler, and that was because it was area of contact, and the areas of contact are high pressure areas where the vessels are occluded by the pressure, and the blood under the gravity does not tend to settle down there. It looks for less pressure areas. And if death occurs in sitting position, hypostasis is seen on the lower extremities. And if death occurs by hanging, as it was the case in the one of previous slides, the hypostasis is seen on lower extremities. And if the death occurs by drowning, hypostasis is seen on the face, front of the trunk, and limbs. Now this pattern might confuse you a little bit, but just remember this pic and you will be okay with it. When a body drowns and it due to accumulation of gases in the body, it surfaces back toward the surface of the water. So that is the normal position. And if you have played in GTA San Andreas or Vice City, etc., then you must be able to recognize this position as the hero in those games when dies, and when dies due to drowning, then that is the position which they show in the game. So you see that the lower extremity and lower parts in this position are head or face, front of trunk, and limbs. And where it will be absent, it will be absent on posterior surface of the body. So hypostasis helps us determining the position of the body. Now, the forensic interest does not limit to that only. The color of hypostasis also varies depending on the etiologies of death. So there are quite a variety of colors of hypostasis, but the four that you should remember are the cherry color hypostasis in carbon monoxide poisoning, dark red colored lividity in the cyanide poisoning, and black lividity in the opium poisoning, and dark brown lividity in phosphorus poisoning. And if you haven't got those, then don't worry a little bit. That's the text of next slide, and we are going to read it together. So color of hypostasis is also of forensic interest. In carbon monoxide poisoning, there is cherry red colored lividity. In cyanide poisoning, there is dark red or brick red colored lividity. In opium poisoning, there is black, and in phosphorus poisoning, there is brown colored lividity. And this is an MCQ of KMU past papers, and it has appeared more than once. And if I am not wrong, then this is also a MCQ of past papers. So you need to remember those. That's all about the hypostasis, and we move on to the next slide. But before moving on to next slide, there is a small point that's not very high yield, but a little bit more conceptual, I should say. Moving a body several times after death will also have an effect on hypostasis, even after the normal post-mortem coagulation of the blood has occurred. In movement of the red blood cells, although severely reduced, still continues. So what's the significance of that? Is that the pattern of hypostasis will change with the movement of the body following death. The continued ability of the red blood cells to move is important because changes in the position of a body after the initial development of hypostasis will result in redistribution. This whole phenomenon is called redistribution of hypostasis, and the examination of the body may reveal two overlapping patterns which may confuse a forensic scientist in determining the exact position of the body at the time of death. Next, we move on to the fourth major rapid change, which is not a very high yield one, but we have to go through it anyway. The next is the Elgar mortis. What's an Elgar mortis? Well, can you guess from the image? Yes, it's related to temperature. It's the hottening of the body or cooling of the body, warming of the body or cooling of the body. Well, people tend to go and get cool following death, so it's cooling of the body. Now, Newton's law of cooling states that heat will pass from the warmer body to the colder body and the temperature of the body will fall. However, human body is not a uniform structure. Its temperature does not fall evenly. And because each body will be present in its own unique environment, each will cool at different speed depending upon the many factors. So, the pattern of cooling is not a very very significant from forensic point of view, as it varies in different bodies, and it depends on the environment around the body. So what do I mean by the environment around the body? As I previously mentioned, that the Newton's law states that the heat will transfer from the cold body, from the warmer body to the colder body. But the rate of heat exchange also depends on the temperature difference. So greater the temperature difference, more quick will be the heat loss from the body, and there will be early Elgar mortis or early cooling, and vice versa. So in order to determine the what can be significance, rather I should say, what do you think the significance is of this temperature related studies? It's an estimation of the death from the it's an estimation of the post-mortem interval or the exact time of death. And to estimate the exact time of death, we need to make two assumptions. Rather, I should say three assumptions should be made in order to calculate the time of death from the cooling of the body. The first assumption is that the body temperature was 37 degrees centigrade at the time of the death. You see there? We assume that the temperature of the body initially at the time of death was 37 degrees C. But however, many factors affect body temperature in life, including variation throughout the 24-hour period, diurnal variation is seen. Similarly, exercise, infection, and the menstrual cycle also affect the core temperature. So the first assumption is that temperature of the body was 37 at the time of death, which is not always the case. The second assumption is that the body has lain in a thermally static environment. Thermally static, what do you think it means? I hope that you have all guessed it right. Thermally static means that the temperature of the environment in which the body was placed did not change significantly, and this assumption is also not very correct. So this is generally not the case, and even bodies lying in a confined domestic environment may be subject to the daily variations of the central heating system, while the variations imposed on a body lying outside are potentially so great that no sensible average can be achieved. And the third and last assumption is that the formula we use for estimation the PMI through the Elgar mortis really work. So there are three assumptions. The first is the temperature was at the time of death was 37. Second is that the environment was thermally static. There was no significant temperature change in the environment in which the body was placed. And third, that the formula we used for determining the post-mortem interval or the time of death from the Elgar mortis or the cooling of the body really works. So these are three assumptions. I did not say these are three correct points or these are three laws. So that's not a very high yield concept because of because it depends on numerous factors and not even one of them is a constant one. So let's go on to the next slide and see what's there. Its significance is PMI, and for PMI we use three assumptions as I previously mentioned, and the second assumption is that our formula really use, and the formula we use are the GR formula and the MH formula. And the details of these formula are beyond the scope of these lectures, as I have never seen them appear in the past paper MCQs, so these are not very high yield concepts. And the factors, like I previously mentioned, there are numerous factors which affect the rate of cooling of the body. So when a body is exposed to air after that, the factors that affect the cooling are: number one, body temperature at death; number two, clothing and covering of the body; number three is air movement and ventilation; point number four is humidity of atmosphere; point number five is environmental temperature; point number 7 is mode and cause of death. If a person has done more physical exertion, his glycogen stores have given off, so there is no post-mortem glycogenolysis. There will be post-mortem glycogenolysis through anoxic pathways, but it will not be that of high level, so the body cools quickly. Number 8 is edema. ECF contents rise and a specific heat of water is high, hence cooling is delayed. In edema, let me repeat, in edema, the water contents have rise in the water contents are high in the body, and we know that the specific heat of water is high, hence cooling is delayed. Age is also an important factor. Infants cool rapidly as compared to adults. Why is that? Is because the infants have lower level of fats in the body, and we know that adipose tissue acts as an insulatory material. And the next slide is like always the MCQ time, and the MCQ की जगह मैंने पहले भी से कहा था SCQ because it is a single choice question. I just mentioned the correct choice from the 10 doctored MCQs. I did not bother mentioning all the options. So let's move on to the next slide and read the text. The color of post-mortem lividity due to carbon monoxide poisoning is cherry red. And can you recall for me what was the color for the opium poisoning? Yes, it was black. Cattle trucking is seen in a retinal artery, and the task that I had given you was to know why it's called trucking. And what's that? Can you read it for me? Techinoidi? Please never call it that in Viva. It's Tash Noir. And Tash Noir appears after death in 3 hours. What's Tash Noir? I did not mention it in the lecture, but it is a rapid post-mortem change. It is the discoloration of sclera. What kind of discoloration? It is reddish brown discoloration of sclera, and it occurs if the eyes are not closed and the sclera remains in contact with the air. So Tash Noir appears after death in 3 hours. Algar mortis refers to the cooling of the body, and rigor mortis refers to the Yes, you're right. Stiffness of the body. Development of rigor mortis is due to depletion of ATP, and the another factor which controls the rigor mortis is high acidity. Yes, you're right. The next is the all are correct about cadaveric spasm, except voluntary muscle environment. A voluntary muscles environment, quiet marked muscular contraction. Certain preconditions are necessary for its onset. It's preceded by primary flaccidity. The last, the underlined portion of each bullet point is the correct option. Is the answer to that MCQ. So we already know that cadaveric spasm is preceded by primary flaccidity and is followed by secondary flaccidity. First post-mortem change that occurs in the eye is segmentation of blood, and it is called trucking event. Tache noir occurs in the eyes in the sclera, and like I previously mentioned, it is a reddish brown discoloration of sclera in unclosed eye, and the sclera remains in contact with the ear, and this causes this discoloration. Instantaneous rigor is another name for cadaveric spasm. Black post-mortem lividity is found in opium poisoning. And can you recall what kind of lividity, or rather I should say what color of lividity is found in cyanide poisoning? Yes, brick rat. Condition for which mechanism is not completely understood is cadaveric spasm. And the cadaveric spasm with straw and mud. There is straw and mud. This indicates drowning, that the person enter into the water alive, severe emotional state, or it indicates all. And the lividity by phosphorus poisoning appears as dark brown. And the last MCQ concerning these topics is rigor mortis is well developed within 12 hours. So these were the MCQs that I have took from the 10 doctor past papers, and these have concerned these topics. And inshallah, in the next lecture, we will study the delayed post-mortem, delayed changes following death, in which we will study the adipocere formation, mummification, skeletalization, etc. And if you carry on with me, inshallah, not a single MCQ of the past papers will be left, and you will do well, inshallah.